How you guys doing?
We're good. Are we ready? Are you?
We are ready, yes, because I also, because I'm hyper, I have it filming from over there, so whatever you are teaching is moving along. Hopefully we're coming in okay. It seems to be a little bit delayed.
Okay. All right, so I've gone to full screen, and can you see the title slide?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, very good. Please let me know if some reason that I get frozen or something happens because I'm not looking at the entire platform. I don't see you all right now.
Okay, for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, let me get myself situated here. Okay, so good afternoon to each of you. For those of you all who do not know me, my name is Dr. Carmela Daniels. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in Dayton, Ohio. And today I'm going to discuss with you the classes, Human Behavior and Social Environment 2. We're going to talk about how social environment influences behaviors, what that looks like from the perspective of social work, maybe even personally, and how you can work with populations that you're going to serve to understand more about that behavior and how it's controlled or influenced by environments. We have a short period of time to work with today, so our learner objectives are going to be basically how external factors, again, influence who we are and the populations that we serve. The reason why this is important is because you want to be in a position to be able to understand where people are coming from. Everyone has a different background, a different platform, different belief system, a different way that they were raised, who raised them, things of that sort. And so all of these things have an influence on who that person becomes. Every scenario, every case, every situation will not always be the same. Two-parent home, one-parent home, it doesn't have any specific, this is how this always goes, or this is how it will go. So when working in populations and working as a social worker, we have to understand that who people are and where people are coming from is always going to be key about how they may perform or behave. Questions to reflect on during the presentation to just jog your mind, get your thoughts together in regards to what we're discussing is how does the social environment influence human behavior? Why that is important. How do we demonstrate these skills to the populations that we serve? How do you have a conversation with who you are working with, a friend, whomever, and say, you may behave this way based on your environment, whether that's family, social media, things that we go through in life, and that can determine how that behavior comes out. How do we overcome obstacles that we may face, even personally, professionally? When you're working with individuals, clients, populations that you're going to serve, no matter what the platform is, many times you can have a conflict between what's environmental and behavior. What is a norm in your family? From a child, you may always have went to church on Sunday and had Sunday dinner. As an adult, you may not do that. That could be an obstacle or a conflict that someone could possibly have because, again, their environment, what they're used to, control their human behavior. Let's work with some definition just to give us a platform, as many of you may already know. Social functioning can mean living up to expectations that are made of an individual by their immediate social environment or society at large. We see these types of social functionings and social modifications all the time. You see it through Facebook or Instagram. You see it in how people dress. You see it in how people perform. There's an expectation of how maybe a woman should look or a man should look. It can be anything that influences behavior. sort. And so social functioning is always constantly evolving. It is constantly making changes and adaptations to human behavior. So you have to be mindful about that. We are influenced by things that we may see on the news, shopping, groceries, what products we should buy, why we should buy that. These are all things that are in our environment that gives us an expectation, or that feel that we have an expectation to meet. So that is what social functioning is. And that is how people make individual decisions about who they're going to be or what they're going to do, where they're going to live, what kind of job they're going to have. It is a platform that we can never escape. Who we are, how we control the behavior, how we work, is all part of our social functioning.
She's a candidate for the director. So.
Environment and person and environment. Back to the previous slide, the things that cause us to change our environment, things that cause us to change behavior. Those are all part of social environment. When you're looking at a person or a client or whomever, it can be personally. For instance, I will give you an example. Growing up, we didn't get the chance to go out of town. We didn't get the chance to travel. We didn't get the chance to do things like that when I was a young child. Now that I have my own children, that is something that my children do. The reason why I've consciously made sure of that is because in my environment, growing up behaviorally, that was something that we didn't get to engage in. It caused me to think differently from that as a child into my adulthood, something different that I would do. It doesn't seem like much in the moment then. I didn't think about it as a child. But as environment and my mindset changed and who I evolved to be, that changed how I thought about it for my children. That's kind of how environment and person and environment can intertwine. Environments can change you or cause you to change behaviors, cause you to think differently, cause you to want to do something different than maybe what you saw, or do something that you did like. Maybe it was like, again, before I said Sunday dinner. Maybe that was something that you done as a child, you're going to continue that. All of that is always constantly evolving. It's constantly evolving as we grow, mature, age. Things that we do as children, we don't do again maybe as adolescents. Things that were important to us as adolescents are not as important as teenagers, so on and so forth. So I'll provide you with a case scenario. How a change in thought created a new behavior. The case scenario is this. 19-year-old young woman who came from a single parent home. Single parent was a product of another single parent. So you have a generational single parent. It was time for her to make a decision in regards to whether or not she was going to work, go to school. She was getting ready to graduate from high school, was able to get through high school successfully, and needed to decide, now what. And working with her as a social worker, I began to work with her on skills that she could participate in to help her to make some decisions. Either you can go to school here, these are some core curriculum courses that you can take, general ed courses that you haven't decided on what your major is going to be. Also, you can work. McDonald's is hiring, and you can start there. They have an application process that is getting ready to open for you. We went through that over and over for several weeks. And it was at that time that I began to understand that she was struggling. She was struggling because in her environment, people didn't work. They did not work. They did not go to school. They did not, it wasn't something that she was used to. So here she is standing with options that she never thought of, wasn't used to, didn't come from her social environment, didn't come from her family environment. And I was presenting something to her that was just absolutely foreign. But she didn't know how to articulate that, and I, as the clinical social worker, couldn't figure that out. I just thought maybe I was giving her the wrong options. Well, the issue became that I was giving her options that she never understood. They weren't right or wrong. It was just, I didn't realize that that wasn't part of who she was in her social family environment. I was asking her to change a behavior or look at a new behavior or create a new behavior that she had never saw before. That is pertinent in working with families and learning how to approach social work in a clinical way. You have to know the baseline of that. Adding or getting, even for yourself, changing a behavior can be very stressful. Even though it may be a good decision, it may be different based on the environment in which you come from. She was worried also about pushback or ridicule or criticism from her family system. She was doing something different. She was changing something about her behavior that they were not used to. All of these factors make up who we are as a person, make up decisions of who we are as people, causes us to do different things. When I decided to move out of state, that was applauded in my family. But in every situation, that may not be. It could be a cultural situation, it could be anything. When you're looking at specialized populations, populations who are considered minority, or where services or systems are not always open or welcome to them, bringing in or trying to get a person to engage in that environment, changing their thoughts or changing behaviors can cause something from their social environment. For instance, LGBTQ are populations who are specialized or identify differently or identify as male or female, transgender, whatever the case may be. Sometimes getting them inside of environments or social settings social or coming out to their family members. It could be a taboo situation. We have to look at how changing thoughts and creating new behaviors are all intertwined in our social functioning, how we function in our daily lives. Environment can and does influence behavior. As we've stated before, working in populations or working with populations, working as a social worker, or even personally, internally, deciding to make a change about what it is that you want to do. Many of you may be interested or are social workers wanting to work with populations from all diverse backgrounds, from prison or from therapy, individual groups, children's, geriatrics, it doesn't matter. The core of who people are generates and starts in their environment. It starts in their societal environment, whether it's family, whether it's, social influence. It does cause and influence behavior. And working with veterans, many times in group settings, veterans will say they may be in recovery. They change their environment in order to continue to keep the behavior modification of staying sober. It's very difficult, they have said, for them to go to old family events, family outings, where alcohol or drugs may be used, because that is the environment that triggered the behavior in the first place. Getting them to work through that and identify that and recognize with them on that is all part of treatment, recovery, and progression. Many times, it's not always the environment has a negative influence that causes a behavior, but it can be back and forth. It can be just as, it can be well. Many veterans have said that they didn't use substances or even smoke cigarettes until they joined the military. Why? Because the environment provided the cigarettes. It was how they killed the pastime. If you were a smoker, you got more breaks as opposed to a non-smoker. So you picked up the behavior based on the environment. And this is how we look at the ever-changing of that. Current time, you see a lot of changes in our environment. Our environment changed through the pandemic. The pandemic caused us to change behavior. The only way that we could really now function in our environment is to make sure that we keep that continued change behavior. So it happens more often than what we know. Just even in the flow of how we live our daily lives, I'm much more conscious about 6 feet apart. We are sitting in a remote environment. I am in one location, you all are in another location. The environment changed, and so the behavior changed on how we provide education, how we provide curriculum, what that looks like for us. So being mindful of how environment influences behavior is how we meet people where they are, how we address our peers, stakeholders, how we work with clients, how we do things in our everyday lives. And this is all a part about how we are ever changing. This is how it always goes back to the slide of environment versus person, person versus environment. It never stops. It is always ongoing. As we mature through our stages of life, from birth to death, we are always constantly evolving, and making sure that our behaviors are reflective of that. Excuse me. I'm just going to drink this water. Are there any questions? Okay.
You guys have any questions?
Let's see something here. A picture has missed here. Major influences on our values also in our goes with our behavior. And again, here we have religion, personal, social. These are major influences on behavior. Religion is also a major one. How we raise, what our belief system is. It can be, do we believe in the afterlife? It varies. It varies. In assessing and working with populations that you're going to serve, when you're assessing and meeting with them, or even just looking at who you are as a person, my children don't go to church as much as I did as a child. It was an environmental thing and a behavioral thing when I was younger, but it's not the same thing in this environment of my home now. So it's still an influence in our life, but we do it differently. We behave it out differently. We do it and act it out differently now. And that's basically on how I changed my environment. And so the continued major influences on our values and behaviors, they're constantly evolving. They could be your job. If your workplace says that you have to do X, Y, and Z, you work to meet that environment need. You work to meet that need. If you don't, then the behavior of doing that opposite can have a consequence. Just like how we follow our societal rules and laws and driving, things of that sort. That is what we continue to do. We've noticed some of these things already before, but I want to talk a little bit more about why do we change? Why do we change in our human behavior? We've said some issues or some things that can cause us to do that now. But we change because we grow. We change because we are ever changing as human beings. We change because situations cause us to change and think and look differently. When I traveled to Dubai many years ago, that was a totally different environment. I had a newfound respect for that environment, and it caused me to think and behave differently also. When we sometimes can correlate or recognize the humanity in one another, it can cause us to change. And that's not always a bad thing. In human behavior, we should be always constantly evolving. The reason why I use specifically Dubai for some of my environmental and behavioral changes was because that was a culture that I had never seen before. I had heard many assumptions about this, that, and the other. When I got there, it was totally different. And so involving and embracing that environment caused my behavior, my mindset to change. And that is how we create and why we cause and why we change and why that's ever evolving. And so just other examples of that again, work, family, you get married or you get divorced, it happens so often, I think we're most times not necessarily aware of it. We are all part of different social, economic, political groups that can lead to change. The social work system is a part of all of that. We have conflict of different values and beliefs. We have different in how we were raised. We have different how we go home every single day. The smallest things that we never think about that are just part of who we are in the environment all affect how we behave. So as social workers, that is key and forefront in providing a high level of care. Coming into that situation with the opening mind that there may be some environmental things that are affecting behavior. To get your clients to move or change or do that is a struggle and can be a struggle. It is not always because they are defiant or not wanting to do that. It takes a lot for me to change as a human being and have to build myself to it, get my mind around it, think about it several times. The populations that we serve are no different. We are all from some different type of background and platform. And as we move through our stages of life and where we are, where we're going, all of that plays a part in who we are. I'm going to leave it open. I'm going to exit this screen. Do we have any questions or comments? That was a little short.
Okay, let me check over here if there's any. So we do have some students joining us online and then a couple in person. Checking on the questions. We have actually some of the students that have visited from Russia. What part of Russia?
Russia.
Okay. And then, so I want to introduce everybody in the room. I'm John Trouth. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio.
I'm Angelia Martin. I'm from Shelby, Michigan. I'm Valeria from Russia.
So we do have a few different environments represented, I guess, going with human behavior and the social environment. We all kind of grew up in those different areas and bring different experiences. Right now, no questions from us. Any faculty members have questions? Like Nikita?
No, I have no questions.
Dr. Johar, Dr. Tokla.
No questions right now.
Not right now.
Okay. Well, let me check the online students one last time. I don't see anything from online students. So that's kind of where it stands. Sometimes they take a minute to digest it and ask the questions after sitting with it for a minute or two.
Okay, I would like to present a question if I can to the learners that are in your room.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
I will, to whomever would like to answer, how do you process or understand how behavior and environment correlate, and how that creates, or how environments create behaviors?
Personally, I think it is a pretty strong correlation. Like, you can always tell, I don't want to say always tell, but you can definitely see correlations between someone who's grown up in a rough environment and the way they act out or react, like in another social environment, say like just at school, especially with like younger kids. So I think that's an easy way to see the way that your environment can really shape the type of person you are.
I think that on the one hand, good environment gives you a lot of opportunities. So if you're living in a good situation, you have like a lot of things you can do. But on the other hand, as I'm from Russia, I can say that the tough place might motivate you better to do something. Like when you have no other ways to live than to fight, you just have to do your best. And sometimes it is just a really a stick with both ends. Like you never know what is better, to have a good environment when you're free to choose, or to have a tough one that makes you to do better than you would if you want to have such.
Hopefully the noise is coming through okay to you guys, but essentially, what I'm kind of like, what I'm hearing both of you say, like, definitely environment is influential, and sometimes you can see it affect somebody in different ways. With a person who exhibits resilience, they're resilient and dig themselves out of the challenging environment they came from, and then also there's some of those that maybe they'll refer to as like trust fund babies, or like we saw an article on one of the members of the, well, I guess maybe is the royal family or George Soros' son. They had pictures of him partying on his yacht and doing nothing with his life, and they wrote an article how that even changed him to then want to go on and get his master's and PhD and show that he would make good on the Soros name, so to speak. And that was an article I read recently. So hopefully the noise comes through okay to you guys. Do you hear us clearly enough?
Yes,
Okay.
Yes, I agree with what the learners have said, because that foundational and core of who we are does have an environment on that. You can't tell when children or anyone has a different background. Sometimes, again, like we said, peer on peer can be influential in behavior. You see a lot of juveniles have issues with getting in trouble, if you will, for the lack of a better term, because their peers are doing something, right? And it may not have anything to do with how they were raised, but it has something to do with who they hang around with. I didn't know that. I didn't understand that when my mom would be like, don't be hanging around those bad kids, because she was talking to me about my peer environment that can affect my behavior or would affect my behavior. And so those things are very key in ensuring and thinking about and looking at how we look at social work, how we look at the populations that we serve, and what that means.
Yeah, more recently we've been talking about early childhood development and just like nutrition and how food deserts have affected some of the growth, even in utero, the type of exposure you may have to the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, even before you're born, and how cortisol can affect the development of the brain and things of that nature. So that's kind of what we're touching on recently here. So it's good to hear you reinforcing that with your presentation.
Yeah, I worked previously for Montgomery County Children's Services, and we would have to get the babies from NICU who were born positive, right? They were born positive, crack cocaine, marijuana, substances. And that developmental stage of that, some of them were never reunited with their mother. But because of that developmental cord from the inside where the child was in the mother's womb and born addicted, those children struggled always with behaviors and things of that sort because of that. Just that core and what you brought up about the food desert, how schools and environments and communities are trying to create platforms for children to eat all year long. In my neighborhood, there were platforms for us to take our children to all kind of free food sites because school and the pandemic changed this. Again, environment changing behavior. Schools changed because of the environment and the pandemic, but that was the only way that most children had opportunity to eat. And that was effective behavior. And the rates of things going on in the environment, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, child abuse increased because the environment where people were at home, children were leaving all day and then coming home, those were increased stressors. Again, the environment changed and caused behaviors to increase or new behaviors to increase because of that. So those are things that are always looked at in environment and how that external factor controls on the inside. Does any of the members have any questions or any other feedback or discussion? This is very clear.
Right, yeah.
It's pretty straightforward.
At the moment, no. We're still, in the first quarter to a third of the semester, so kind of getting that intro. And I appreciate having the chance for you to do your presentation for us today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to present to you all. Hopefully the information was beneficial on how environment controls and affects behavior. And I thank you all for your attendance and participation in that.
Dr. Daniels, if you could just hold on for a second.
Okay.
Okay. Dr. Trout, do you need the Teams link to run the rest of your class?
I don't. No, I'm using another venue over here. If that's so, we can actually sign out right now.
Oh, okay. Okay, so maybe I'll just continue with Dr. Daniels and.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Good to see you all.
Thank you so much. Yeah, for allowing us to talk to your class.
Yes. Oh, go on.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What was the purpose? Like, there was a lot of common words generally. What
Right.
was?
So whenever you do a faculty interview, it can last for up to 24 hours. A lot of times in the past, before the pandemic, they would fly you into the city where you wanted to teach at. They would take you out to dinner and they talk to you and wine and dine you. The next morning you go and you usually meet like the dean and then the provost and then the chair of the department and the faculty members. Then you're supposed to present your research, like your dissertation. And then you're supposed to teach a class.
It was research? Yeah.
Yeah, this is her faculty search. And so they always ask for a class to practice their teaching in with students. And sometimes we ask you guys, how did you feel, or how did you, and it's fine to give your honest opinion or however so we are interviewing for director of the social work program.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, right, yeah. So you usually look at 3, 4, or 5 different folks and then kind of make the decision. That makes sense.
Well, I know Dr. Tucker was one of my teachers, and I was gonna be like, I got a 98 on the last thing.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
That's good, right?
Yes.
So he's all online. Is it all electronic? I guess.
Yeah, his is completely online. So I only see him virtually on Mondays and Wednesdays.
Right. Well, yeah, because he's moving down here from Akron, Ohio.
Oh, wow.
So he taught 26 years, and they had massive layoffs last year. During the pandemic, they just cut 10 faculty that were 26 years. He had 2 kids, and he luckily was able to find a position with STRS. And so, yeah, he's on the faculty search. A few others are, and yeah, that's kind of our search. We have Dr. Charlotte Allen was our director and helping us go through our reaccreditation. I started here in 2019 after teaching 2 years at Miami University and then 2 full-time at NKU and like several part-time at UC and NKU. So I just had 2 babies, so I don't feel in the position to be in the director position. I don't have the time. I just would be like a little bit overwhelmed or stressed out. So we have opened the search. She is from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and sometimes you have to teach for a few years to be able to like kind of feel comfortable and just like do what you do naturally. And like maybe even with Dr. Tokar, he just has like a naturalness to teaching about it. And she started teaching sometime last year at Wilberforce and maybe more online. I think a lot of classes were online. So sometimes it takes a while to learn, and they teach you how to teach in your program, and then you kind of go from there. So that's what the faculty search looks like. I remember as a student sitting through this, and I always wondered why they want us to sit through it. It's like sometimes to get honest feedback, like would you want them as director of the program? If not, why? If so, why?
It's strange to give such feedback when the person is still here, because usually you don't want to give an honest one, but the person,
You don't want to hurt your feelings.
yeah.
So I don't think that I'm pretty sure we're locked down, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm sure that we went out because I had several accidents with teams.
Oh, really?
In my university, like when somebody didn't switch on the
Are you
volume.
serious?
Yes, because somebody said some bad words during the lecture, and the lecture was like, I have 4 groups of like 30 people, and I'll try to figure out who was that bad guy.
Was this in Russia?
Yeah, yes.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we left the live feed. I mean, we still could probably chat because I think you can do this. I can right click. Doesn't it let you just like exit?
Yeah.
Is that so? Yeah. So it was interesting though too because I thought maybe she would ask where in the book we were, but maybe because this search was put together quickly, like 'cause the semester has begun, we don't have a director. It's kind of important to have a director. Not all schools do, but eventually you have to. So she didn't ask what part we were on, but this morning at the interview, I just let her know that we're kind of basically on the part about development with the infant mental health, the infant assessment, inventories, different assessments that we do. There's so many videos on this part of it. Basically in the 70s, I'm only going to do a couple slides because that took up most of our class. I don't want to drag it out for you guys, but they used to call you retarded when your IQ was below 7. So if you were born, your intelligence quotient was tested to be below 70. You were called retarded. We have different softer terms now. But here it says, until the 70s, parents were encouraged to institutionalize your babies with a developmental delay. Now we call it developmental. So they would put them into these different institutions. For whatever reason, they may still do it in other countries. I don't know if they would do that in Russia. If you're like retarded, do your parents keep you?
We don't have like a military tests, so
Okay.
many parents it doesn't even know.
Okay.
Usually you start to understand like for school you trying to test like is the child ready to go to school, and at that moment, some parents are like, "Oh, my child has autism. What should I do with it?"
Mhm. Right, so one interesting thing I found is we finally broke out of this, and I think they essentially did call it institutionalization. I can't spell it, so I'm gonna let people spell it. And there's a lot of stuff that came out then, mainly because it wasn't your own child, so the care that was given to some of these kids was a mess. And there's also the or developmental delay. And I maybe need to put in something more. So yeah, both mental health and sometimes they would just group the folks together. And it was maybe two different unmet needs. So you had folks that were developmentally delayed and then others with mental health. So like you had these institutions that were just, I'm remembering the guy's name now. Have any of you guys heard of Geraldo Rivera? So this is kind of what made him famous about these. And this was some of the videos that he had done. Hopefully this can give us a synopsis, but he would go in and film what these institutions were doing. And so some of the parents, they thought they were sending their kids to a safe place. And they'd be sitting there all by themselves like that in a cold little room. Kind of heart-wrenching. Let me see if, I can't tell if that's my wife said, the boy won't let him sit down. Won't let her sit down. She's about to die. Anyway. So Willowbrook was where this was broken, and he did a lot of, he was basically a journalism. Well, there he is. So I think he went back on his, because he did this when he was 22. Here it looks like 60 or 70. So he kind of went back and I think visited some of the guys that he got out of those institutions. Maybe this one is just like a random. I don't know if I clicked on videos, that might be an issue again too. So this one may be a little bit more lengthy, but this is kind of how he broke the story to these folks. And they were a mess. I mean, they were really kind of sad.
It was 43 years ago that my next guest, using a stolen key and an inside tip, entered the halls of the Willowbrook School for the Developmentally Disabled on Staten Island. What he captured was a story so shocking, it changed the face of mental health as we know it. Let's take a look.
The doctor had warned me that it would be bad. It was horrible. There was one attendant for perhaps 50 severely and profoundly retarded children, lying on the floor naked and smeared with their own feces that were making a pitiful sound, a kind of mournful wail that it's impossible for me to forget. This is what it looked like, this is what it sounded like, but how can I tell you about the way it smelled? It smelled of filth, it smelled of disease, and it smelled of death. We returned without the knowledge of the school administration and through a back door. It was the first day all over again. For these people, life is just 1 hour after another. Looking at the floors, every child can be trained. These kids, there's no effort. We don't know what these kids are capable of doing. How is it living on the ward that you live? It's good. Describe the end. We ask for change, we demand change. But you see, it just doesn't have to be this way.
And with me now is Geraldo Rivera. Geraldo, welcome.
I see that and it chokes me up to this day. It's almost like an automatic response. It just evokes, and I hadn't seen it, it just evokes that original sensation, that feeling that I had when I walked in there. I had no connection at all to the population we used to define as mentally retarded, now developmentally disabled. So seeing it for the first time was it was like a dramatic shock. It was like, I hear describe, I'm sorry, I hear describe the, how GIs reacted when they saw the concentration camps when they were liberated, even those who intellectually knew what they were getting into. And, it's like a form of post-traumatic stress almost. And Bernard, I was with Bernard just last Friday.
Bernard was that young man
Yeah.
from the mustache that you were talking
And, he was 21 years old on that day, so we could spring him, we could get him out, he could sign himself out at the age of 21, because technically it was a state school, they called it. So we got him out, and Bernard was a classic example. He's a guy with cerebral palsy and other disabilities, but he was not a low IQ. In other words, his IQ was normal, within the normal range. He was just misdiagnosed. In those days, they put everybody in the institution. They just would. So here he had cerebral palsy. He was 3 years old, living on the Lower East Side, single parent, Puerto Rican mom. And the doctor says, you can't handle this kid, take him, we'll put him in these institutions. So Willowbrook on Staten Island in New York City, I was in New York City, it wasn't like in Belarus or, Asia someplace, it was New York City. And they put him there at the age of 3, so this is 18 years later when we found him. And, but he's worked for the city. I just want to make this one point, Rocky. He's worked for the city, he's still working, not the city, the state of New York, he's a patient advocate. So he's had a long career. He's now 66 years old and he's about to retire, but he is exactly what I'm talking about in terms of potential unrealized for that population.
But what was Willowbrook supposed to be? What did it sell itself as? What services did it pretend to provide?
Well, great question. Remember that it was styled a state school. So the idea was there's public schools for the able-bodied children and these state schools for the disabled. But what happened over time, and some of this has to do with the union structure and the relationship between the union and state government, but over time it became like a catch basin. In other words, you saw in that video, again, I haven't seen it in a long time, you saw kids with Down syndrome. You saw kids that were obviously profoundly retarded, was the way we described that population. Then you saw others with less severe, but still some significant disabilities. So everybody was put together and there was no remediation. It was called a school, but there was no education or remediation or vocational training. There was none of that.
I was reading about Willowbrook and I found this, which surprised me, that as far back as 1965, Robert Kennedy had been, speaking against Willowbrook about the conditions in Willowbrook. So how did it last so long? How did it go so long as it was?
Great question. They had a scheme, and the scheme was the right to privacy. In other words, Kennedy goes in 1965, Robert F. Kennedy, senator, goes in 1965. He sees it, calls it a snake pit, but there's no pictures. Why are there no pictures? Because it's the right of privacy of the residents, inmates, students, or whatever you want to style it. So the outrage in his voice and him being moved, Robert Kennedy being moved, it came and it went because there's no nightmare, haunting, or image that
What you saw, what we just saw,
You
what you
can't-
showed.
it's undeniable. Then suddenly there's no other side to the story. See, with Kennedy comes, he's emotional, but then the director comes on and says, well, I disagree with the senator, we're doing this or that, and then it's two sides to the story. When you see the pictures, only one side.
Yeah, right. And what was actually going on in there? Was it just gross negligence or was it actual physical and sexual abuse?
Well, all of the abuse happened for sure, but the biggest abuse was the concept that you could mass produce care of the disabled in the way you made Ford motor cars, or you know what I mean, an assembly line that, you keep them all there, and right now you line them up, now you feed them. They fed them this kind of slop. The kids would like open their mouths, and they'd throw a big glump of oatmeal in, and most of them were dying from pneumonia because of the way they were being fed. So the scheme, that was the scheme. The scheme was, it was basically a holding pen, a kennel for humanity disguised as a school.
Did anybody go to jail as a result of your report?
Nobody went to jail, but something much more significant happened. What happened was that the myth that this state was doing the best it could, this state, every civilized nation was doing the best they could with this population, with these institutions, that myth was exposed. And it began a movement where there was no longer plausible deniability that we were doing the best we could in a difficult situation. Now everyone knew that the institution was no way to care for this population. It absolutely began the end of the institutional era that had existed since Bedlam in the United Kingdom in the 19th century.
So that's what began as a result of this report.
It is rare that there is a happy ending to these stories. It's also rare that television news is engaged in the process of positive social change. So easy to do an expose, complain about something, move on, next story, another expose, here's a fire, here's a thing, here's a terrible thing, next. In this case, we knew what the solution was. The solution was small, community-based residences where this population, rather than being stuck in these wards, scores of them, people could live 3, 4, 5, 6 in a residence, in a real home, a house home, with basically one-to-one attention, where their human potential could be realized, where they could learn to sew or work at fast food or do whatever it is that they were able to do. They got training, they got remediation, they got counseling, they got much better physical care, and it changed the world. Then the institutions began closing in this state, the more progressive blue states first, then it swept the nation and really swept the civilized world.
And how did this report, you doing this report, change your life?
Oh my goodness, it was a change. I think that, I don't want to get all emotional again, but I for a long time, I lived with the feeling, a guilty feeling that my life had changed far more than their lives, than the lives of the residents.
So that was the end of the deinstitutionalization, or the beginning of the deinstitutionalization, end of institutionalization. And these were folks, again, here that for a while they would just say, take them to the home, they'll take care of them, you can go live your life, you do what you want.
Do the parents keep the connection with their children, or it was like giving them away?
I feel like they did sign them over to the state. I think they did sign them over, and they just were kind of with since then, intervention programs were then developed for infants with disabilities and services and infants. So I think they did sign them over. I mean, I've seen this when I lived in Nicaragua. I would see a few communities that were kind of similar to that, but they still had the one-on-one care. Now, since then, I've worked at places such as this. This is one of my first social work jobs at Stepping Stones, but it's called Living Assistance for the Development of Delay. I think they've even changed their name again. And these are usually characteristics of having Down syndrome. You can kind of see it in the face. It's called trisomy 21 and the single 21st chromosome. And I don't know how many countries still allow this, but if you did that on a ultrasound, often they were allowing an infection of somebody with white trisomy 21. Also in China and in India, if they saw it as a girl, they would allow abortions. They're like, no more girls, I have men. And now they're 30 million lopsided. But, so what I feel like came from this movement now is that they help them to live, so discovering their housing options, they have a lot. Work, they learn about their employment options. Or connect, and they have social programs and do things like the Flying Pig Marathon and they do stuff. Actually, one of the houses was right behind the neighborhood I grew up in. And they were pretty big houses, but they all had their own apartments. We got a garden and horticulture therapy program going at some of them, and spaces that they were doing. yeah, that is the apartment right behind me. Find a way. That's it. So, yeah, they are community support living. So they still do have staff. If an emergency comes up, yeah, there's a foster independent living. They do offer respite, which if like the parents are exhausted, they will have programs for a weekend, like I do the summer camps for folks to do what they call as a respite. So this started in '75. The video Geraldo Rivera did was like, I don't know, do you remember what they said? Like 68, 69 or something they said. So, again, it's just like, trying to draw the connections of what came about it. I wonder if they have pictures of the garden. It might not. But I had a friend who started the okay, they do have some, which is nice. Because I think this was just like a minute program as we kind of started this, and we're doing some of the horticulture therapy with them there. So this was a little bit of our infused stuff.
You belong among the wildflowers. You belong in the book I see. Sail away, kill all the hours. You belong somewhere.
So one of the residents, she does have Down syndrome, got her Master Gardener certificate from Ohio State University, and is now teaching folks at the residence how to garden.
Hello, everybody. How was your weekend? Today, you're all going to be reviewing some of the different tools that we discussed last week. Here is our fertilizer, our pot, our garden glove.
I have seen who come back with you. You belong among the wildflowers. You belong in the book I see. You belong.
So we're trying to get internships there at LAUD. They're big in like Cincinnati and some of the spaces. They may be up as far as. So, but to think as a child, 1 year of age, we put into these institutions to be like taken care of in the 60s, and that was luckily we've developed our care where it kind of empowers them to empower themselves and like grow an opportunity. And some have amazing jobs with that. So parents have child exercise and activities to do with the child to help you enhance their development. So that comes back to like nutrition and brain development and connecting in many ways. Also strengthening gaze, muscles, enriches interaction with the environment, and enhances cognitive and physical development. So there's a lot, right at that young age. If you're just kind of like thrown to a house and fed and barely kept alive, maybe you've seen plants that look that, or you have a house plant of your own. If you just barely keep them alive, the plant looks terrible. And similar, human, not to compare plants to humans, but if we're not given our full potential, yeah, we'll stay alive, but we're not going to be like beautiful. What did you say? Survive.
Survival, not life.
Right. Yeah. So. I'm going to stop on this one just because there is so much going on in early childhood development. But so some strengths and hazards. There could be an injury from accidents, and that could be sometimes you get in a car accident and mom has to deliver the baby right away. There could be illness or susceptibility. There's herpes virus, which is like a cold sore. If you get herpes, if you get a cold sore on your lip. This is important to know. All of us know, but it is transferable all 4 ways. Like a man can give it to a woman can give it to a man. Problem being if the baby's born and mom has an active outbreak of a cold sore or herpes virus, it can be spread to the baby. So That's illness susceptibility. So a lot of times they do like the C-section, so you're not delivered vaginally to pass on the herpes virus. We've already gone over SIDS, but with sudden infant death syndrome, a lot of it is safe sleeping, but that's not all of it. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. And then you take preventative measures. I'm getting so old, it's killing me. Breastfeeding. So it's not who recommends breastfeeding, it's World Health Organization recommends breastfeeding exclusively for the first 6 months. That is really hard to do. My wife is even having, because she has 2 babies, she's having a hard time. He's 4 months now. So she does pump, like when they go to sleep, she's able to pump, and you can give them breast milk, so that helps. And the reason it's important is because antibodies are passed down from the mother to protect against infections and SIDS, and then also long-term benefits against illnesses such as diabetes. I guess she can pass on she had coronavirus in December, she said, so she's passing on her coronavirus antibodies, because the kids can't be vaccinated, you know what I mean, like until you're 12. And then leukemia, high blood pressure, asthma, and then less than 40% of babies aged 6 months or younger are EPF internationally. I totally forget what that is. Thank you. It says it up there, doesn't it? Thank you.
Okay.
You can tell by lack of sleep. So yeah, it's hard to breastfeed. It really is, because sometimes the baby doesn't latch, sometimes she's holding her, and then our daughter Isabel comes up and like whacks him in the head, and he cries. So there's all kinds of stuff going on. So pumping's a little easier, but then you also lose your milk. There is, I don't know if we go through that, but we'll go through it next week. Like breast milk has 3 stages. The first 3 days it's like blue, it's like a weird color of blue. And then it turns into like fat.
Whoa.
Let's see if they have a picture of it. 3 stages of breast.
I'm impressed with my body.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's like there's something that's
Whoa. There was a girl with 3 cups.
oh, there you go, look,
Yeah.
it's freaking blue, I swear. Maybe it's because she's wearing a blue shirt behind it. I don't know. It's like,
Yeah, it's not because of the shirt.
why does she have a sponge though? I'm confused.
Maybe she's wearing a t-shirt with breastfeeding. It's like
Yeah, your breast milk changes like immediately. Potential scammer.
Hello, I'm Nikki. I'm one of the co-deputy supporters, and I'm going to be doing a demonstration to show you what a breastfeed looks like.
Is she Irish?
The liquid that's in this jug represents breast milk. The water has just been dyed blue so that we can see it a bit better. And you may notice the user expression
she
of milk.
faked it.
She did fake it, but there literally is, there really is these 3 stages. So one of them is like for right when you're born, and they're too long.
I cannot believe I can't imagine what kind of chemicals must be here to paint such colors. I saw him, it was white.
Right. Well, methadone.
Colostrum?
Oh, colostrum, that's it. Have you guys heard of that before? Or did you
I
see
just
it?
thought of it.
Okay, so where was that?
The first one.
Oh. Okay. So basically, it has like a blue tint to it, but there's 3 stages. We'll get into it in more detail, but colostrum is what you get right after you're born. And it like brings you from the womb into the world. The second one is the transitional milk, and stage 3 is mature milk, and like it's very, very fat. Like when you put it into the fridge, it like separates because it has so much fat. Like it's cold. Kind of interesting. I wonder if she has pictures. Let's just see if there's any pictures. Milk changes over time. Yeah, the body's pretty amazing. So colostrum is the first stage that occurs during pregnancy, lasts for several days. Either yellowish, okay, maybe I'm describing it wrong, I apologize. Yellowish or creamy in color, it's also much thicker than milk that's produced in breastfeeding. It's high in protein, fat-soluble vitamins, minerals, and immunoglobulins. They're antibodies that pass from the mother to the baby and provide immunity. Stage 2 is colostrum lasts for 2 weeks. It has high levels of fat, lactose, water-soluble vitamins, and it contains more calories than colostrum. Because they don't need many calories when they're first born. They're just kind of, you want to get them healthy and stay alive. Stage 3, mature milk is the final milk produced. 90% of it is water, which is necessary to keep the infant hydrated. It's kind of sweet too. The other 10% is comprised of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So, I never heard of that. Whore milk is the type of milk found during the beginning. And then hind milk is like for weight gain. Yeah, because you like double your weight at the end. So I don't know if they. So sorry I quoted blue. That does sound weird.
Okay.
Hi, Maggie from Bojan here. Welcome to Express Yourself, the channel where we share
She just chats the whole time.
Okay, go on the voice that.
I know.
It's a video I want to
We
see.
could go to class. I want to see some real stuff. But yeah, it's now I am. Where did I get this like? Blue milk, breast milk, blue milk. I swear there's something that's like. There you go. I told some seriously, she probably ate something. But like, honkies is crazy, so I know this sounds weird, but like to save my wife the hassle, I bought her this, there's a new machine on Amazon. You basically can hook it up and it's portable, so she can go around the house and deal with the babies and she's pumping while she's doing it, you know?
That's pretty convenient. Like,
So-
you're multitasking.
I was like, she showed it to me, I was like, God, another $100 item I have to buy. It's like, all right, here you know, like, let's get it. Because it really, I mean, otherwise you're attached to the wall. You're stuck. You know what I mean? For like 30 minutes, 4 times a
We
day.
usually have like thing that you use your hands like to create vacuum and to do it. So.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
She has those. And they have some where you just put the cup inside your bra and it leaks. Like you can leak into it. You don't need to pump, but pumping does make your body produce more too. So, let's see if her report pumps here. It was a big deal. I was like, I mean, she's like, I was.
Whoa, wrong one. It looks good.
I guess you could pump with this. So hers looks kind of like that. That looks cheap. What the heck? I should have gotten that one. We bought it on Amazon for $100.
That's why we top notch. Definitely giving me, I have to wait some years.
Right, yeah. So, and then like I said, she's 35, so they consider her a geriatric pregnancy.
Yeah. I won't wait that long, hopefully. But
Right, well,
still,
yeah.
I got time.
Right. You
For
guys-
some reason this year, I think like a lot of people do against me. I have time.
Right, yeah.
What age are you? 25.
Oh God, she said, I've been holding James for 2 hours. My back is throbbing. I cannot keep doing this. So we're both losing our mind. Like my back too. It's like I get home and I'm like, oh my God. So, and unfortunately, this is the day I have faculty meeting next, like literally 19 minutes, and then we have a class at 5:45. But that's all I have for today. We can finish on the breast pump.
I have an impression that this course is getting me ready
Right.
for life, which is